Most nights, Caleb Hunter spoke only to graves, his cabin, his axe, the trees none ever answered. But the earth remembered. It held the last words of his wife and unborn child in its frozen skin, long after the rest of the world had moved on. What he didn't know, standing alone in that endless white silence, was that someone was about to answer him. And she wouldn't speak with words. She would come carrying a heartbeat he thought he'd never hear again. The wind always came from the north, steady and sharp as regret. It whispered through the pine needles, curled beneath the edges of Caleb's coat, and settled deep in his bones like grief that had made a home. He stood at the edge of the bluff, boots planted in snow crusted hard as iron. Beneath his feet, buried 3 feet down in frozen ground, lay Mary. And beside her, in a smaller grave he dug with fingers gone raw from cold and sorrow, lay a child he had never held. He didn't bring flowers. Flowers didn't belong out here, not where winter never truly left. Instead, he brought silence. And maybe that was enough. "I'm still here," he murmured, still waiting, still listening. The wind didn't answer, but the trees did tall. Honest creatures that bent but never broke. They swayed gently, as if nodding in reverence. Caleb liked trees. Trees didn't lie. They either stood or they fell. That morning, the snow hadn't stopped. It swirled gently around his hat brim as he turned and made his way back down to the cabin, a structure built of hand-split timber and memories. It was no longer a home, just a shelter, a box to sleep in, eat in, breathe in, survive in. The days came and went like shadows moving across the mountains. He chopped wood until his shoulders screamed. He fixed a broken trap line. He boiled coffee so strong it stained the enamel off his tin mug. But by mid-March, his flour was down to half a sack. Salt pork, nearly gone. Coffee, God help him, would run out before the thaw. That's when he knew he'd have to go into town. Mason's Hollow was a jagged thumbprint of a place, tucked into the bend of the valley, where rough men and rougher whiskey gathered. Caleb tied his mare, Clover, outside the general store and stepped into the warm rot of wood smoke and sweat. He picked up flour, lard, kerosene, and the smallest bag of sugar they had. He'd paid and was turning to leave when the shouting started. $50 for the girl, a voice barked. Caleb paused, one boot still hovering above the wooden floorboards. He didn't want to look, didn't want to know, but he did. At the back of the store, raised on a fruit crate, stood a young woman, black, bound at the wrists, dress torn at the shoulder, chin lifted in defiance. Her eyes were hollow, but alert. She wasn't begging, wasn't crying. She was surviving. Beside her, a wiry man with a slick voice and shaky hands tried to rile the crowd. "She's strong, a worker, healthy," he called. "She'll pay for herself 10 times over." The men laughed, jeered. Offers came like flies. 40, 60, 75. If she shuts up. Caleb hated that sound the one men made when they knew they held power over someone who couldn't fight back. It was the sound wolves made circling a broken deer. He should have walked out. He should have let the world keep burning without him. But then her eyes met his. And she didn't plead. She simply held his gaze, steady and quiet, like she was daring him to remember he had a soul. 100, Caleb said, voice low but firm. The room froze. The auctioneer blinked. 100 sold paperwork was thrust at him. A scribbled bill of sale, a signature, a reluctant handshake. The girl was untied and pushed toward him like a sack of oats. Caleb looked at her. "Can you ride?" She nodded. They left before the store's warmth could sink into his coat. The cold hit them hard. Caleb helped her onto his second horse, then swung up onto Clover. They rode in silence, the mountains rising around them like the ribs of some sleeping god. "I'm Caleb," he said after a while. She stared ahead, then said quietly, "Evelyn." He nodded. "You hungry?" A pause. Then, yes. At the cabin, he made stew and gave her the bed, slept by the fire with his boots on. She didn't speak again that night, but as he drifted off, He thought he heard her crying, and something inside him, some old cracked place he thought long dead, shifted just a little, as if maybe, just maybe, spring was coming. The fire snapped softly as snow fell beyond the window. Evelyn lay on the cot with her back to him, one hand tucked beneath her cheek, the other resting protectively across her belly. Caleb watched her from the hearth, his knees drawn to his chest like a boy afraid of the dark. He hadn't meant to bring her here. He didn't even know why he'd spoken at the auction. It had been instinct, or maybe guilt, dressed in the clothes of impulse. But now she was here, and that changed everything. In the morning, she cooked, not out of duty, but as if she'd always been there, boiling water with ease, chopping the last of his carrots with clean, quiet movements. Her silence wasn't sullen. It was studied, as if she was testing the shape of this place and the man who owned it. Caleb watched her stir the stew and noticed the tremble in her fingers. She'd been through something, maybe still was. But she wasn't broken. No, broken things crumbled. Evelyn, she had angles, edges sharp enough to cut anyone who came too close. He understood that. They ate at opposite ends of the table. The cabin, already small, seemed to shrink around their silence. "You don't have to cook," he said finally, wiping his hands on his pants. "I do," she answered. "I need to move." Caleb nodded. That, too, made sense. He poured 2 mugs of boiled coffee black, bitter, no sugar, and handed one to her. She took it without thanks. They sat in silence until the wind howled through the eaves. Then she spoke. "That man back there, the one who sold me. His name is Wesley Griggs. Your—" Caleb let the question hang. "Stepfather," she replied flatly. Lucas was his son. Lucas. The name meant nothing to Caleb. Evelyn continued before he could ask. We were together. Before he died in the logging accident last winter." She didn't say more. She didn't need to. Caleb stiffened. His eyes dropped to her belly, still small, but gently curved beneath the layers of her coat. The way she'd moved. The way she'd never looked him full in the face. He understood now. "You're carrying his child." She nodded. Caleb looked away. The fire popped behind them, casting shadows that crawled up the log walls. "I didn't know until a few weeks after," she said quietly. "By then." It was too late to matter. Caleb let the words settle. They were heavy, full of pasts that neither of them could rewrite. "Why'd he sell you?" Her laugh was sharp. "Because I was inconvenient, and because he owed money to men who don't wait patiently." Caleb took a sip of coffee and said nothing. 3 days passed. They didn't speak much. Caleb chopped wood and hunted. Evelyn boiled pine needles for tea and mended the holes in his shirts with a bone needle she carved herself. She was useful, practical, precise, and yet, when she sat on the step outside to breathe or stared too long into the flame at night, something flickered behind her stillness, a kind of loss that mirrored his own. On the 4th morning, Caleb found her outside, sitting on a log, her hands cupped around her belly. Snow dusted her shoulders. She didn't flinch when he approached. "Something wrong?" he asked. "No," she said. "She's just kicking. I don't know why I know, but I do." Evelyn glanced at him. "You don't believe me. I believe mothers know things men can't." That made her smile. A small one, but real. Later that evening, as they sat by the fire, she asked, "Why did you do it? Do it by me." Caleb stared at the flame. The truth was too tangled. Guilt, impulse, the way her eyes had locked on his like they knew where he'd come from. "I don't know," he said. "Maybe I couldn't stand the way those men looked at you, like you were meat at the market." Evelyn's expression didn't change. She looked down at her mug and nodded once. Whatever the reason, she said, "Thank you." He didn't know what to say to that, so he nodded too, and let the silence return. That night, he dreamed of Mary, not the Mary who had died in bed, sweaty with fever and swollen with unborn promise, but the Mary from before laughing in the river, her hair soaked, her dress clinging to her legs like sunlight on water. He woke with tears on his cheeks. Evelyn was still asleep. curled on the cot with one hand outstretched toward the fireplace. Caleb covered her with a blanket and returned to the rocking chair. He watched the last of the fire turn to coals and knew this wasn't temporary. This wasn't a favor or a passing burden. Something had shifted. The cabin wasn't so quiet anymore. The snow had softened by the 5th day, though the air still bit through wool and leather like truth through a lie. The forest no longer looked like death. It looked like a pause, the kind that comes right before something changes. Evelyn had begun humming, not loud, never more than a whisper. But as she swept the floor or peeled potatoes, a melody would slip from her lips like sunlight through cracks in old wood. Caleb didn't recognize the tune. He never asked. He only listened. One afternoon, as he skinned a rabbit near the woodshed, Evelyn joined him, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders and a rusted tin pail in one hand. "You need help?" she asked. He paused, blade halfway through flesh and fur. "I've done this since I was 10. "That doesn't answer my question." He gave her a sideways look. "Sure." She sat on a stump across from him, picked up the second rabbit, and started skinning like she'd done it 1,000 times. "You know how to do this. I know how to do a lot of things I wish I didn't." They worked without speaking. The only sounds the rasp of knives and the quiet sighs of melting snow from the cabin roof. Caleb watched her hands, not soft like Mary's, but strong and practiced. He thought about what kind of life had made them that way. When they finished, she rinsed her hands in the snow and stared at the pines. Lucas used to talk about trees, she said. Said they reminded him of people, the way some bend in storms, and others just snap. Caleb wiped his blade on his pant leg. "He sounds like someone who paid attention." He did. She paused. He was gentle. "That what drew you to him?" Evelyn's face darkened. At first, she stood and started walking back to the house. Caleb followed a few steps behind. "Did you love him?" he asked quietly. She stopped on the porch. "I thought I did. Or maybe I wanted to. That's not the same." "I know." That night, the wind howled harder than usual, the kind that rattles windows and sneaks under doors. Evelyn sat near the fire, stitching a tear in Caleb's shirt by lamplight. He watched her from across the room, the way the shadows played across her face-high cheekbones, lips pressed in concentration. He wanted to ask what she'd been like before grief etched lines into her eyes, what she'd laugh at, what songs she sang when no one was listening. Instead, he said, "What happened to Lucas?" She didn't look up. "They said a tree fell on him at the logging site, but I don't think it was an accident." Caleb straightened. "Why, because 2 nights before he died, he told me he was scared of his father, Griggs. The name tasted like rust in Caleb's mouth. He found out about us," she said. "Didn't like it. Said I'd ruined his son. Said it was unnatural. And the baby he didn't know yet. I was waiting. Lucas wanted to tell him himself, but he never got the chance." She set the shirt down and met Caleb's gaze. "You ever look at someone and know they'd rather erase you than understand you?" Caleb didn't answer, but he knew. Later, when the fire had burned low and the cabin had gone still, Evelyn spoke again. "If I don't make it." "You will," Caleb interrupted. "If I don't," she said firmly, "I need you to promise something." He didn't speak. "Raise her like she's yours. Don't let her grow up thinking she was a mistake." Caleb's throat tightened. He rose from the chair and crossed the room slowly, then knelt beside her. "She won't be," he said. "Not with me." They didn't touch, didn't cry, but something passed between them, not love, not yet, but something old and sacred, a vow forged without ceremony. She laid her head back against the wall, eyes heavy with sleep. Caleb returned to his chair. Snow tapped the windows like fingers searching for warmth. And in that small cabin, under the hush of pine and wind, 2 people haunted by separate ghosts began quietly to believe in each other. The sound came like a memory, not sudden, but slow and familiar in the worst way. Just past dawn, with frost still clinging to the window pane and the fire only embers in the hearth, Caleb heard it hooves on ice-crusted snow. Deliberate, heavy, dangerous. He didn't speak. He just stood and reached for the rifle leaning against the wall like it had been waiting for this moment too. Evelyn knew before he said anything. "They're here," she whispered. He gave a short nod, watching through the frost-glazed window. "How many two riders? One of them's him." Her face tensed. Griggs. The name sat between them like rot in a clean wound. Caleb pulled on his coat, loaded 2 extra rounds into his pocket, and stepped out onto the porch, boots crunching through old snow. The horses emerged slowly from the tree line, one dark bay and one pale gray. The man on the bay wore a badge, silver dulled by wind and cold. The man beside him rode like someone who'd never earned his saddle too stiff, too proud. Wesley Griggs. Caleb Hunter, the marshal called, raising a gloved hand. "We'd like a word." Sir Caleb didn't respond right away. The mountains stood silent behind him, indifferent. The trees watched like old judges. "What's your business?" he asked. The marshal reached into his coat and unfolded a paper. "This is a writ issued under the authority of the federal courts. Mr. Griggs here claims you're unlawfully harboring a domestic under indenture." Caleb's jaw tightened. "She's not a slave. No, sir, not according to the law. But indentured service is still enforceable under contract. Says here she was sold under false pretenses. That contract was filth, written on a lie. That's not for you or me to decide. That's for the court. She's not going back." Griggs leaned forward in his saddle, sneering. "She's carrying a bastard, trying to pass it off as my boy's. Lucas had better sense than that." "She's not property," Caleb growled. "She was under my roof, under my name. That makes her mine." From the doorway, Evelyn stepped out slowly, her coat wrapped tight. Her voice didn't shake. "You sold me, Wesley, not just my service. You put a price on me like I was a broken horse. You were ungrateful. Trouble. Lucas pitied you. That's all." Caleb saw her flinch but didn't move. "I told you she's not going back," he said again. The marshal's voice was quieter now. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." "Mr. Hunter." Caleb didn't answer. His fingers brushed the rifle stock. He felt Evelyn's presence behind him. Not fear, but steadiness. Resolve. Then she stepped forward, past him. "I'll go," she said softly. "No, trust me." He turned to her, frowning. But when he looked in her eyes, he saw the plan already there, like fire under ice. She leaned in. "Let me run. Just give me time." His pulse pounded. His throat clenched with something he didn't want to name. "Now," he said. Then he fired a single shot into the air. The world exploded into movement. Horses reared. Griggs shouted. The marshal ducked. And Evelyn ran. Her boots flew across the snow. Her skirt lifted like wings. She didn't look back. Caleb swung the rifle down. The marshal raised his hand. "Stand down. She's got 10 minutes, Caleb said. "That's all I bought her. Don't waste them. You're interfering with a federal claim. I'm interfering with a godless man hunting a woman like she's game." Griggs spit on the ground. "You'll pay for this." "Maybe," Caleb said, "but not today." They left eventually, Griggs cursing, the marshal scowling, hooves pounding away through the pines. The silence that followed felt sharp. Inside, Caleb didn't stop moving. He packed rations, skins, powder, jerky, flint, and every bit of warmth he could carry. He didn't lock the door. There was nothing worth guarding anymore, nothing that wasn't already outside. He found Evelyn's trail easily. Light but sure, she'd moved east, toward the high ridges where few dared go. Snow fell in quiet sheets, but her footprints still marked the white. He followed without hesitation. By noon, he found her crouched low beneath a wind-carved rock shelf, her hands braced on her knees, breath visible in short gasps. She looked up as he approached, but didn't speak. "You all right?" She nodded. "They'll come back." "I know. With dogs. More men." "I know." He knelt beside her, watching her face. "You still want to keep running. You still want to keep helping. Doesn't feel like a choice anymore." She gave him a look, something between tired and grateful. Then she reached out, not to touch him, but to press her hand gently against her stomach. The child stirred beneath her palm. Why, she asked. Why are you doing this? He could have lied, said it was about justice, or debt, or anger. But instead, he said, because some people are worth the trouble. They climbed higher. The forest closed around them, wild and silent. No trails, no maps, just wind and instinct. By dusk, they found shelter in a shallow cave choked with pine needles and old bear smell. Caleb built no fire. They couldn't risk the smoke. Evelyn collapsed against the wall, eyes closed, arms folded around her child. Caleb sat beside her. I'm slowing you down, she murmured. We stay together. She didn't answer, but leaned gently against his side. Below them, somewhere far off, a dog barked once and then again, closer. The hunt wasn't over, but neither were they. Snow sealed the cave mouth by morning. When Caleb pushed aside the curtain of pine boughs, only a wall of white stared back. No light, no trail, no escape. Just stillness, the kind that came before either spring or death. Inside, the silence between them had changed. It was no longer the hush of strangers holding their breath, but the quiet of two souls learning the rhythm of survival together. They no longer moved around each other like unsure guests. They flowed like two halves of something once broken, now learning how to fit. Evelyn sorted what little food they had. Caleb checked the snares he'd placed the night before. A single rabbit, thin but still meat. They ate in silence, heads close, spoons scraping tin. By the third day, they'd stopped marking time. Evelyn worked while sitting cross-legged on the ground, mending a tear in Caleb's coat. She used thorn needle and sinew thread, her fingers precise despite the numb in the air. Her movements reminded him of his mother, calm, exacting, full of invisible grace. He watched her, chin resting on one hand. You staring for a reason, she asked, without looking up. Maybe, she smirked. You always that honest, he shrugged. Lying takes energy. I'm saving mine. She smiled, just barely. The expression flickered like a candle on a low wick, but it lit something in him nonetheless. Caleb turned back to his carving, a scrap of pine he'd started whittling into something small and round. He wasn't sure what it would be yet. Maybe a rattle, maybe a cradle ornament, maybe hope, in a shape his hands could hold. The nights were the worst. The wind screamed like grief outside the rock, and the cold pressed against them with the persistence of old regrets. They didn't speak then. They just lay side by side, their backs to stone and bodies pressed together beneath shared wool. One night, her head settled into the curve of his shoulder. You ever think about going somewhere else, she asked, into the dark, like where, anywhere with light? He chuckled softly. Not in a long time. Why not? He thought a moment. Because light shows what you lost. She was quiet, but he felt her fingers curl lightly around his. You ever been married? She asked. He nodded. Mary. Died 2 winters back. Fever took her. Took the baby. 2. She exhaled slowly. I'm sorry. It was a long time ago, he said, but it wasn't. Not really. Some grief lived in the marrow. It never thawed. It just learned to stay quiet. What about you? He asked. I loved Lucas, she said, but I think I loved the idea of being chosen more. You were a burden he wanted to carry, Caleb said. She looked up. And what about you? I don't know yet. The storm outside raged for 4 more days. They rationed carefully. Tea became snowmelt. Rabbit bones were boiled twice. Evelyn grew paler, and the baby kicked harder, as if sensing the world closing in. But they never talked about running, only surviving. One afternoon, while the wind slept and the snow softened to a hush, Evelyn reached across the space between them and laid her hand on Caleb's. You never asked, she said. About what if I want to keep the baby? He turned his palm upward, fingers grazing hers. I didn't ask, he said, because I already know. She blinked. How you hold her like you've already forgiven her for being born into a broken world. Tears gathered at the corners of her eyes. She tried to speak, but only breath came. And then she nodded. That night, they built a fire, It was risky light meant exposure, but Caleb said they needed warmth more than fear. The glow painted the cave walls in gold and shadow, and Evelyn sat close, one hand on her belly, the other resting beside his. "I never thought I'd feel safe again," she whispered. He looked at her. "You are—" The fire popped. Sparks drifted upward like prayers with no name. "What do you see in me?" she asked. "I see someone who survived what should have broken her." "That's not love." "No," he said, "but it's the root of it." She leaned into him then, head on his chest, and he wrapped his arm around her shoulders like it was the most natural thing in the world, like he'd always been waiting for that wait. Outside, the wind changed direction, and for the first time since winter began, it didn't sound like sorrow. The storm returned with fury the next morning, not quiet like before, but brutal. Snow fell sideways, slicing through the trees with howling wind behind it. The mouth of the cave vanished in a white blur. Inside, the fire sputtered, barely clinging to life. Evelyn woke with a gasp, her face pale, drenched in sweat. At first, Caleb thought it was the cold. But then she doubled over, hands pressed to her belly, her breath caught in her throat like a scream trying not to happen. "It's starting," she whispered. Caleb dropped the pail of melted snow. No, it's too soon. 6 weeks, maybe 7, she said, her voice tight. "But she's coming anyway." He moved quickly. Blankets, firewood, water. He'd delivered calves before. Foals too, but never a child. Never something this fragile. "Breathe slow," he said, just like that. "You're all right." But she wasn't. Her skin was flushed with fever, eyes glassy. The pain came hard, then harder. She bit down on a leather strap to muffle her cries. The wind outside would carry sound for miles. "I need to see," he said. She nodded, unable to speak. He pushed her dress back gently. The child was coming fast, too fast. He'd never felt so helpless, so afraid of losing something he hadn't even had time to love. Hours passed in jagged pieces. Evelyn drifted in and out, murmuring names he didn't recognize. Her body trembled with exhaustion. When the baby finally slipped into his hands, she didn't cry. She was too small, too still. Her skin was blue-tinged, her chest barely moving. No, come on. He cleared her nose, her mouth, rubbed her back. Nothing. Then he leaned down, put his lips over hers, and breathed once, twice, again. A cough, a shudder, and then a sound. Weak, wailing, but alive. He laughed and cried at once. "There you go. There you are." He wrapped her in his cleanest flannel shirt and laid her on Evelyn's chest. "She's here," he said. Evelyn's eyes fluttered open. "Is she okay?" He nodded. "She's perfect." Evelyn's fingers touched the baby's cheek. "She's so small. Fighters usually are." They sat in silence, surrounded by warmth and ash and the storm. Then Evelyn's voice came, thin but steady. "You need to know something." Caleb looked at her. Her face was calm, but her eyes burned. Lucas wasn't just Griggs's son. His mother was white, but his grandmother was Creek Indian. Caleb blinked. "That true?" She nodded. "Griggs spent his life pretending it wasn't. Hated that part of him. Hated that Lucas loved it, and hated you more for reminding him." "Yes. When Lucas told him about the baby, he threatened us both." Caleb stared into the fire. "You think he killed his own son?" "I know he did." She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a letter, edges creased, stained. "He wrote this the night before he died. Told me to take it to someone named Marshall Rowan if anything happened. Said the tree fall wouldn't be an accident." Caleb read it slowly. Lucas's words were clear, sorrowful, but strong. His fear, his love, his warning. "He meant to protect you both," Caleb whispered, "but he's gone. And now." She looked down at the baby. "It's just us." She closed her eyes. "If anything happens to me, don't." "Listen," she insisted. "If something happens, you raise her, like she's yours. You don't let her carry my shame, or Griggs's hate. You're not going anywhere. Promise me." He hesitated, looked at the baby, her tiny chest rising and falling like snow settling on pine. "I promise. That night, her fever climbed. She cried out for Lucas, for her mother. She clutched Caleb's hand like it was the only thing keeping her tethered to the world. He held the baby, rocking gently, whispering the names of rivers and trees and stars, anything to keep her calm, anything to stay awake. By dawn, Evelyn was weaker. Her voice was a rasp. "She's hungry. I'll get milk. I'll go down the mountain. It's not safe. I'll deal with it." She reached for him, placed the folded letter in his hand. "Take it. If I don't make it, you will. Take it anyway." He tucked it into his coat. The paper felt heavier than steel. "I'll be back by nightfall," he said. "If you're not, take her and run. Don't come looking." "I'll be back." He kissed her forehead. Her skin burned hot beneath his lips. Then he slipped out into the storm, the baby's soft cries echoing behind him like a thread he didn't dare lose. The climb down the mountain was a race against time and ghosts. Caleb moved like a man-possessed snow up to his knees, wind biting through his coat, every step echoing with Evelyn's voice. Don't let her grow up thinking she was unwanted. The baby's hunger was urgent now. Her cries haunted him even after they'd faded into the trees behind. By midday, he reached the Blakely farm, the nearest scrap of warmth for miles. He traded his rifle for milk, cheese, and a piece of clean cloth. The farmer's wife didn't ask questions. Mountain folk understood silence. "Baby, come early," she asked. "Too early," he muttered. She handed him a wool scarf. "May God be kind." He didn't answer. He was already turning toward the path home. But it wasn't smoke from the hearth he smelled when he neared the shelter. It was burning wood, acrid and black. His stomach dropped. He dropped to his belly and crawled through the snow, heart slamming against his ribs. Through the haze of smoke and scorched air, he saw them, 4 riders. One was Griggs. Another wore a different marshal's badge, not the man from before. The other 2 were armed, scanning the slopes. "She ain't here," one deputy grumbled. "Tracks go uphill," the marshal said. 2 sets, one coming back. Griggs spat. He went for help. "Or food. We wait." Caleb counted every breath, every second. They'd burned everything. But Evelyn wasn't among the ash. She'd run. In her condition with the baby, he circled high above the camp, the milk sloshing in his pack like a ticking clock. His boots slipped on the ice, but he didn't slow down. Not now. He found her 2 hours later, wedged into a narrow crevice between 2 boulders, half buried in snow. She lay on her side, unmoving. The baby was tucked beneath her arm. For a breathless moment, he thought they were both gone. Then the baby stirred. He fell to his knees, trembling. Thank God. He fed her drops of milk from his fingertip. Too weak to suck. She still tried. That was enough. Her little lips moved. Life clung to her in silence. Evelyn didn't wake. Her skin was hot, her breathing shallow. There wasn't time. Caleb wrapped the baby in wool and bundled Evelyn the best he could. Then he lifted them both into his arms and began to walk, not back down, but up, toward the only place left untouched, the old cabin on the ridge, where Mary's grave stood like a sentinel. The trail was treacherous. His legs burned, his back screamed, but he didn't stop. Not once. By sunrise, they reached the bluff. The cabin was intact, cold and dust-covered, but still standing. He laid Evelyn on the bed, built a fire, fed the baby more milk. But Evelyn didn't stir. Her breath came in thin, whistling threads. He knelt beside her, brushing snow from her brow. "You're home," he whispered, but she was already fading. Her eyes opened only once, and for a moment, they cleared. "Is she safe?" she asked. "Yes. You kept your promise." He nodded, voice breaking. She exhaled slowly and didn't breathe again. He didn't cry. Not then. He held her hand until it grew cold, then wrapped her in the blanket she'd sewn herself. He laid her beneath the pine beside Mary, hands crossed over her chest, eyes gently shut. 2 women, 2 graves, 1 man kneeling between them, holding a child born of love and fire. As he shoveled, the baby cried behind him, not loud, but alive. They came later that morning, 4 men on horseback. Marshal Bradley led them. Behind him, Griggs fumed, red-faced with rage. Bradley dismounted slowly. "Nice grave you're digging." Caleb stood tall, the baby tucked inside his coat. "She died giving birth." Bradley's eyes moved to the still form beneath the pine. That Evelyn Griggs. She was Evelyn, Caleb said. She belonged to no one. Griggs stepped forward. "Where's the bastard?" Caleb didn't answer. "Don't play games. I know she's here. She's not yours to claim. She's my blood." Griggs roared. "Lucas's mistake. My burden to clean." Bradley raised a hand. "Easy." But Caleb had already reached into his coat, not for a weapon, but for a letter. "She's not a burden," he said. "She's a promise." He handed the paper over. Bradley read it slowly. His jaw tightened. "This says you murdered your own son." "Lies," Griggs hissed. "Funny," Caleb said. "You recognized the letter before I even showed it." Silence. Then Bradley drew his weapon. "Wesley Griggs. You're under arrest." Griggs moved first. His pistol cleared leather, aimed at Caleb. "Give me that child or I'll..." A single gunshot rang out. Griggs stumbled, dropped to his knees, and collapsed into the snow. Red bloomed beneath him, staining the white. Bradley holstered his gun. "Should have dropped the weapon," he muttered. The baby stirred. Caleb held her closer. Bradley looked up. She got a name. Caleb nodded. Sarah Hope Hunter. And her parents Caleb looked to the two graves. Then back at the child. "Gone," he said. "But not forgotten." Bradley made a note in his ledger. "You planning to raise her, if the law allows it." "The law," Bradley said, "has no problem with a man keeping a promise." Spring arrived in pieces that year. It came in the slow drip of snowmelt from the roof, in the green shoots pushing up between Mary's grave and Evelyn's. It came in the quiet moments, in the sound of small laughter bouncing off log walls, in tiny footsteps learning to dance across wide planked floors. The baby, Sarah Hope, grew strong. She had Evelyn's eyes, wide and watchful, and a stubborn chin that might have come from Lucas, or maybe from Caleb himself. He'd never know, and he'd long stopped caring. To him, she was his. In every way that mattered. Caleb built the cabin wider. He carved a cradle by hand and lined it with pine needles and wool. He hung bells from the porch and let the sound chase away the silence that had once lived here. The mountains no longer felt like walls. They felt like home again. Each morning, he fed Sarah by the window, whispering stories into her hair, about stars and rivers, about women who were strong, and men who had to learn how to be. At dusk, he walked her between the graves and taught her not to be afraid of sorrow. "This is where the brave sleep," he would say. "They don't want you to weep. They want you to run, laugh, live." He meant it, and she seemed to understand. One day in early June, a preacher rode through, dusty coat, weathered eyes, a voice like slow thunder. "Heard you might have a child in need of blessing." Caleb nodded and brought Sarah out wrapped in a white blanket Evelyn had begun to sew but never finished. The stitching was uneven, one side frayed. Perfect, he thought. They stood together by the stream behind the cabin, the one fed by glacier water and shadow. Caleb held her close as the preacher cupped water in his hands. What's her name? Sarah Hope Hunter. And her mother and father Caleb looked toward the slope where two grave markers stood. Wildflowers were blooming now, soft, stubborn things that grew in spite of everything. "They're resting," he said. "They gave her the world. I'll teach her how to carry it." The preacher nodded and dipped his hand again. Water flowed. Words were spoken. Sarah blinked at the sky like she already knew the truth of it. Afterward, as the preacher rode away, Caleb sat on the porch with Sarah asleep against his chest. A breeze moved through the trees, warm for once. He looked down at her face and whispered, "You're not the end of a story. You're the beginning of one." And he believed it, with all that was left in him. Sometimes, love doesn't come wrapped in what we asked for. It arrives instead in the form of a burden, or a responsibility, or a stranger whose pain echoes our own. And when it does, we're faced with a choice to retreat into what we've lost or to open our arms to what might still be found. Caleb chose to open his arms, not because he was strong, but because he'd finally understood what strength really meant. It's not silence. It's not survival. It's showing up every day for someone who needs you more than you need your own sorrow. So if you've ever felt lost, or too late, or too tired to love again, remember this. There is no too late for redemption. There is no too broken for belonging. There is only the next moment, and the courage to step into it with an open heart. If this story moved something inside you, I want to hear from you. Tell me what part stayed with you. Was it Caleb's promise, Evelyn's strength, or the way Sarah Hope was born into a world that almost refused her? Leave a comment below. Your words matter more than you know. And if you believe in stories that heal, that carry something true inside the fiction, please like this video, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe so you won't miss the next one. Until then, keep the fire lit, keep the promise, and hold on to hope.